It has been almost 4 years since the release of Snowpiercer's first episode in 2020, and to say that it has been a wild ride would be an understatement. From the peak world building and intense character conflicts of the first season to the utter disaster of a storyline we received in Season 3, the Snowpiercer Television Series has definitely had its ups and mostly downs, and the same can be said about many of the show's characters. The train is utterly filled to the brim with narcissists, sociopaths, and people so driven by revenge that it consumes any sense of idealism and morality that might have existed with them prior. And worse still, with the inconsistent writing and questionable moral messaging of the show, it can be very hard to find any character that is good all around or likable in any way. However, despite this, I will be ranking 10 characters that, in my opinion, are the best under the criteria concerning the consistency of their writing, how they are used, as well as who they are as characters within the actual show. And with that out of the way, let us begin. Alright, starting off on this list in the number 10 spot we find Jinju Song. Alright, I admit it. It is almost cheating to have a character on this list when there are dozens of other contenders who lasted more than just a single season, but Jinju's character is simply phenomenal, despite playing such a minor role in the show. While Andre would serve as the revolutionary devil or angel depending on how you perceive things on Bess's shoulder, Jinju serves as the counter-revolutionary juxtaposition. Jinju is a reasonable person who is, at least by some degree, completely in on the house of cards Melanie has assembled in the years leading up to Season 1. And though her character only serves as a supplement of resistance to Bess's joining of the revolution, she does an amazing job at it. But because she was only ever a supplemental character, it's likely why she never appeared after Season 1 from an out-of-universe perspective. Jinju as a character has never had a reason to exist outside of being the reason that Bess has to remain inside the system, but once Bess took that leap into the revolution, there was no purpose for her, and she had no relation to any other character beside Melanie as another voice of reason, a role that Melanie already had filled by Javier and Bennett. And in the number 9 spot, we find Bess Till. Bess is definitely a character you're meant to like and leave it at that. While she's not the main protagonist of the show, she, especially in the earlier seasons, was always supposed to be an audience insert. She was meant to appeal to the broadest audience possible, especially in the early season. Throughout the entire show, she often finds herself scared and confused when it comes to the traumatic events that occur over the course of the 7th and 8th year aboard Snowpiercer, which is exactly how all of us would feel in a world like that no matter what we tell ourselves. However, what sets her so low on this list would certainly have to relate to her portrayal in some of Season 2 and most of Season 3, where her character deteriorates into a hypocritical mess, such as when Bess takes issue with Wilfred's execution of those responsible for massacring the Breachmen in Season 2, while having slaughtered jackboots by the dozen unjustifiably in Season 1. In addition, the focus on her homosexuality inflates to an obnoxious and irrational degree when she and Miss Audrey develop a sudden romance in Season 3. Looking at Bess Till in the vacuum that is Season 1, she is certainly one of the best characters, but the decline of her moral character, the growing sexualization of her homosexuality, as well as failing to provide the proper audience insert in the later portions of the show leave her only at number 9 on this list. After the first season, she simply just degrades into being a shadow for Leighton, and while that can be described as good storytelling, it's not very compelling when it's done constantly, and she never evolves into anything else, although she does get a good glimmer of hope when she deals with Pastor Logan and she finally goes on some stories of her own and begins to deal with the trauma of being on the train for so long. Next up, in the number 8 spot, we have Javier de la Torre. When I was first watching this show, Javier was definitely one of my favorite characters, and rarely enough, he was one of the few characters that actually got better with time, especially with his character arc of being traumatized by being mauled by Jupiter, only to slowly overcome it and prove that he isn't just a filler engineer playing third fiddle to Melanie and Bennett, although this does just go back to normal and is quickly reversed as Alex's prominence in the show increases, making Javier even less relevant than when he started. Much like Bess, Javier has the benefit of being a lot more relatable and reasonable compared to other characters as well, and he also serves as a perfect representation of Wilfred's villainy. Despite all the talk of Joseph Wilfred's supposed evil deeds, it is only ever claimed that he is evil. We are only ever told that he is evil. However, the 2 times we are shown that Mr. Wilfred is inexcusably evil is when we see his treatment of Kevin and Javier. Although it may not be enough to overcome the amount of times the show has broken the show don't tell rule with Wilfred, Javier's role in the show as an expose of Wilfred's evil is essential, as it brings him down to the same level as other characters, rather than letting him be a justifiably cult character motivated only by truth and hard reason that is merely evil because he's an old, rich, white man who happens to own the train. Number 7. Andre Layton. Now, it certainly pains me to see him so high up on my list, as I personally hate the character Andre Layton, but for the purposes he serves in the convoluted story of Snowpiercer, he's an undeniably good and, when looking him under a certain lens, is actually an amazing demonstration of what ideals without experience to rule can do to a person and to a regime. When looking at Snowpiercer from Andre's perspective, he had every single reason to rebel, and the lengths he would go to in the beginning for the sake of the tale getting fair representation is more than admirable. In Season 1, he is the revolutionary freedom fighter we would all want ourselves to be, and when looking at him in a vacuum of Season 1, he's a phenomenal character that I can only ever root for and love. However, it is in later seasons when Andre's character becomes crippled by hypocrisy, lies, and failed ideals to the point where you question what the message the showrunners were actually trying to communicate. In the first season, it was obvious, free and fair treatment for all, no matter what their station. Although we could all debate over the specifics of that message, the message itself is an undeniably good one. However, as soon as Wilford is brought into the picture in Season 2, the message of a democracy-loving revolutionary falls flat on its face as Andre moves to do nothing but seize power for himself. From declaring martial law, refusing the ceremonial vote for Wilford to lead the train, to taking the engine eternal on a hunch, and outright betraying the tailies only to be saved by sloppy writing, Andre has become a textbook idealist-turned-tyrant. If he were represented that way in the story, then he would be much higher on this list, as he would serve as the message that power corrupts. But because he is consistently portrayed as the moral anchor of the show no matter what he is doing, refusing to acknowledge that he has succumbed to a decline of corruption, he cannot be higher on this list, and it makes me only question the message that the showrunners were actually trying to portray. Number 6. Melanie Cavill. Much like Andre, Melanie has an incredibly compelling story in the first season that, although degrades rapidly in the later seasons into a storm of hypocrisy and erraticism that didn't somehow relate to a bigger picture, her story in the first season holds strong, and it's where much of the tension in the show originates. Every time that her lie is close to being unraveled becomes an incredibly intense scene, and when the House of Cards finally collapse, we can really see just how pragmatic and conniving of a leader she is, possessing a strong moral center that, despite its flaws, does not degrade with time, while also being more than willing to use nastier means of ruling in order to keep order. And because of that very pragmatism, she serves as a great juxtaposition to Andre in the beginning seasons. While he is an idealist who believes that the train can be run in the way that he sees it, Melanie is one who knows that the train can't be run that way and that it's just a dream. And though she's willing to support that dream, she also doesn't necessarily buy into it. She's run the train for 7 years, and she knows that it's not that easy to just walk in and change everything. Ignoring the later seasons, we can really see her as the calm and collected leader that Snowpiercer ultimately needs, being the linchpin necessary to keeping the peace on the train while she struggles to find peace within herself over losing Alexandra. However, because of her character degradation in later seasons to just being a copy of Andre Layton, especially thanks to the showrunners failing to make Mr. Wilford all that evil, it just makes her entire show arc look like a silly, overblown vendetta. For that reason, she cannot be higher on this list. However, when taken in the vacuum that is Season 1, she is yet another polished gem of the Snowpiercer show. Number 5. Bennett Knox. Ben is a good character for many of the same reasons Melanie is. Strong, pragmatic, and serious, while also remaining far less corruptible or emotionally erratic as Melanie. Although he's just a yes man to Melanie throughout Season 1, the reason he comes to surpass her is because of his ability to keep Melanie relatively centered, as well as his own strengths as a moderate side character in the long run over the course of the entire show, which is a very rare attribute for Snowpiercer characters, as most characters become incredibly emotionally unstable and predictable thanks to poor writing over time. Because of Ben's sheer consistency and essentially being a copy of Melanie, minus her flaws over time, he wins the number 5 spot. Number 4. Commander Gray. Now we're getting into the really good characters. Nolan Gray is, without a doubt, the best villain Snowpiercer really has ever had, even more than Wilford. Although that is not necessarily thanks to his long-running schemes or character traits, it is more than made up for in the season and story that he does manage to play a part in. Over the course of the entirety of Season 1, Commander Gray is menace incarnate. Every move that he does, every glance of his eyes that you see puts the viewer on edge because he is ultimately the only one who can challenge Melanie and the revolutionaries on Snowpiercer. He is a simple character, but because of his good writing and simplicity, he dwarfs other characters, even though he only appears in one season. Perhaps my only criticism of Commander Gray is the short romance that he has with Ruth, but other than that, he is one of the best characters of the entire series, simply because of his quality as a villain and a threat to the main characters. Number 3. Ruth Wardle. Ruth, like Bess, is yet another insert for the audience. However, where Bess acts like the audience member who takes part in the revolution, Ruth is, at least in the beginning, the one who remains loyal to the old system. There's not much to say about Ruth other than that. She is someone who believes in the Wilfred system more than anything else, she has reasons to believe those things, and is probably one of the most content characters by the beginning of the show. And though she becomes irrelevant by the later seasons due to the poor writing leading to the homogenization of all characters, Ruth Wardle marks herself as one of the most amusing characters as well as the most compelling to watch, simply because of having such drastic character development over the course of the story. Simply having character development isn't that impressive on its own. Every character in a good story has character development, but because of the poor writing of the show, she is one of the few characters who actually has character development for laid out reasons that make sense, rather than having character development come out of nowhere. However, because she winds up just evolving into another carbon copy good guy by the end of the series, it really holds her back from being anything more spectacular. Number 2. Sam Roche. Ah yes, Sam Roche. Need I say more? Sam Roche is just a man trying to do his job and keep his family safe. While other characters take part in grand power struggles, brutal revolutions, and hypocritical schemes that can only leave you scratching your head, Sam Roche remains uncorrupted and reasonable throughout the entire show without having his moral center necessarily ever corrupted. Sure, that can make him a relatively boring character, but in a train where there is no one else quite like him when everyone else is so inconsistent, erratic, and emotionally unstable, having Roche be a moral paragon is refreshing if not outright needed. It is rather unfortunate how irrelevant he is in terms of the story, but it may very well be a blessing rather than a curse that he was never fully developed or made into a main character, as if he was made into a fully fledged main character, he likely would have suffered the exact same issues as with every other main character: constant hypocrisy, broken morals, erratic writing, and other character assassination. Because Roche is just such a stable, unchanging figure in the Snowpiercer show, it makes him a good anchor in such an ever-changing, unstable, unpredictable setting, none of which I use as a compliment in the instance of the Snowpiercer show. And finally, in the number 1 spot, Joseph Wilford. I suspect that for some of you this may be the last place you expected him, and for the rest of you this might be exactly where you expected him to be. Joseph Wilford is an absolutely phenomenal character whose only ever flaw is that the story constantly walks back his abilities just so that way the main characters can fully defeat him. Sean Bean as Joseph Wilford portrays an incredibly charismatic, consistent, cunning, and relatively level-headed character who you can predict, and despite what the show says, rarely comes off as evil outside of what he's done to Kevin and Javier, which, for a character people are supposed to see as the ultimate evil, isn't really enough. Mr. Wilford has always been my favorite character, even during Season 1, when he was never actually in the show. The amount of mystery that surrounded the Visionary in Season 1 is a feeling that I'll sadly never experience again, and the sheer degree of cunning Wilford possesses combined with how unlikable the main characters are, makes it a constant treat to see him run circles around the main cast. I've come to love the character of Wilford so much that I even made an extremely long lore video that takes everything we know about Wilford, combines it with the best theories attainable, and constructs the most likely timeline of the entire lore of the Snowpiercer show, revolving around Wilford's life, of course. And though Wilford is undeniably fucked up, he is, out of himself, Melanie, and Andre, the leader of Snowpiercer I support most, not only because of his simple skill as a leader and engineer, which Melanie also possesses, likely in equal amount, but also because of his rightful ownership of the train, and because Melanie has always been driven by an overwhelming vendetta against Wilford that is almost completely unjustified. I could debate this for hours in my Discord server, which you can find a link to down below, but almost everything Wilford does has a deeper reason to it that isn't rooted in simply being evil. From gunning down the scientists during departure rather than letting them slowly freeze to death after Melanie brought more than she knew she was allowed, to going to the end of the train to deal with the Taily problem and search for Alexandra just before getting left behind by Melanie. Wilford is a man with, to me, clear motives as well as complex characterization, which sets him well apart from any other character in Snowpiercer. dwarfing even Roche in my opinion. And with him supposedly winning in Season 2, and with him nearly gaining a redemption arc in Season 3 before that chance suddenly vanishing for no apparent reason, Wilford is a character packed with content throughout the entire story, with his only low moments being when the story needs him to lose for the story's sake. So, there you have it, my top 10 list of characters from the Snowpiercer TV series. Some of you may agree with it, and some of you might find it rather outlandish. Whatever the case, leave a like if you found this video interesting, and write a comment down below and let me know your own top 10 character list. It's been a good long while since I've done any Snowpiercer content, so I hope this comes as a great relief to those who suspected I was completely done with the show. Although I am occupied with other creative works, as well as personal obligations these days, I do want to start making regular Snowpiercer content again, most likely in the form of videos concerning the deeper analysis of the show's plot, as well as its characters in relations to literary art. In older times, my content was rather brainless, as anyone can make opinion videos about episodes that just come out, but given my long experience in studying of storytelling, I suspect that these new videos I want to do will involve a lot more skill, and by connection may come out as far superior and more polished products for you to enjoy. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful ride on this twilight of a franchise.